The attack on New Terra, the sky over New Terra held the color of calm oceans in the early light, and the colony below moved with its daily rhythm as if nothing in the stars could touch it. Children ran near solar panels chasing each other through rows of tall green crops while workers hauled crates filled with tools and rations to a small transport that would take them toward the mines. Beyond the ridge, machines hummed gently under the soil, maintaining the breathable air and the gravity field around the settlement, while elders watched the horizon from their dome-shaped homes, speaking softly of old Earth and the journey it had taken to build a world so far from danger. People of New Terra had no soldiers and no weapons beyond basic tools for clearing rock or welding steel, because they believed in peace and progress, and because no threat had touched them in 30 years of life among the stars. Their nearest neighbor in space was light years away, and even that species had no interest in conquest, only trade and silence. And so the colony had grown without walls, without fear, without the heavy weight of war that Earth had once known so well. Then the sky changed. First came the sound, not like thunder, not like a ship entering orbit, but a vibration that touched the skin and the bones and made people freeze mid-step with buckets in hand and words half-spoken. Then came the light that washed the blue away and turned the morning into fire and shadow as 6 massive crafts appeared in low orbit, shaped like knives and black as space itself, moved with no signal and no attempt to communicate, as if the people below were insects and not settlers and not children of Earth, and as if no answer was worth waiting for. Panic did not begin all at once, because no one understood what was happening. But then one of the ships turned slightly, and a beam of red cut through the power station like slicing fruit, and the lights across the colony blinked out at once. And the real fear began. Parents screamed for children, workers ran toward shelters that had never been tested, elders held each other under collapsed roofs, and the sky gave no hint of mercy or delay. The Valari did not care. To them this was not war, but occupation, not attack, but message, not death, but proof that the outer worlds were soft and ready to be taken without resistance. Their weapons fired again, taking out the crop fields, the water systems, the hangars where small colony ships stood, unarmed and open. And within minutes New Terra had no way to breathe, no way to grow, no way to escape. People died with confusion still on their faces, never expecting that peace would, and not understanding why this happened or who had decided they should be erased. But underground something moved beneath the surface, below the old storage levels, inside a chamber left sealed for over 20 years. A signal blinked to life, triggered by the destruction of the power grid and the loss of outer sensors. Signal was not meant for local use, not meant to warn the people or call for evacuation, because it was older than most colonists and created for one purpose only. It was called Echo Response, and it spoke not to planets, but to a fleet that did not appear on maps and did not wait for orders. Far across the stars, the signal reached a station that existed in silence, without name or address, where a small crew of watchers looked at one another without speaking, and then entered codes that had not been touched in decades. In a distant place behind asteroid fields and dark energy clouds, a fleet woke from sleep. Machines powered up with no sound, lights blinked red across screens that showed nothing but coordinates and names of colonies flagged as critical. Among them, the name New Terra burned brightest. No broadcast went out from Earth, no messages were shared to other worlds, because this was not diplomacy and not public. This was human protocol built in the time after the last Great War, when Earth had lost too many people to trust words alone. Above New Terra, the Valari ships hovered like gods, watching the fires die down and the bodies fall still, while their commanders sent messages back to their own empire filled with laughter and confidence. They spoke of weak humans and soft colonies, and how easily the outer rims would fall now that the defenders of Earth had chosen to sit in silence and let the galaxy grow without their presence. They had no idea what they had done back. In the ruined colony, a single drone floated from the rubble of a broken tower, black in color and silent in motion. Unseen by the Volari, as it climbed high enough to scan the area, then shot back down and buried itself beneath the ground inside its core. The drone stored images of destruction, names of the dead, heat maps of weapon fire, and a full record of the attack sent directly to Task Force Orion. Without a single word spoken, the Volari would not know they were being watched, not until it was far too late. Night fell over New Terra, with smoke still rising from the wreckage, and the stars above cold and distant, but somewhere far beyond those stars, metal giants were already moving through the dark, preparing for something the galaxy had not seen in years, not revenge, not war correction, and it had already begun. Echoes in the void. Far away from New Terra, behind a wall of black space and artificial storms, the command deck of Station 9 lit up with red signals and silent warnings. The kind of alerts that never blink unless something terrible has happened. Commander Hayes stood at the center of the room, eyes on the large display showing a spinning image of New Terra with the word compromised flashing again and again across the screen. He said nothing because there was no need. Every person in the room already knew what that word meant and why the old signal called echo response had been triggered. No one questioned the alert, no one asked for details, because humanity had planned for this since the old wars, since the betrayal on Mars, since the great silence from their allies in the past when Earth burned and no one came. Now, humans did not wait for help, they made their own answers. They built ships in shadows, trained soldiers in silence, and created weapons too dangerous to share even with their own colonies. Task Force Orion was born in secret and kept alive by rumor and fear. Even among humans, most believed it was just a story told to frighten enemies or warn foolish diplomats, but Commander Hayes knew better because he led IVE. Watch the team move without orders, unlocking vaults, loading systems, calculating jumps, all of it done in a rhythm that spoke of training too deep to forget and readiness that never faded. The first fleet was already leaving orbit before the news of New Terra reached Earth's public network, because the people did not need to know, not yet. Across the galaxy, other worlds buzzed with chatter, news of a colony destroyed, of human settlers wiped out, of the Volari claiming responsibility and warning others to stay silent or be next. Some species laughed, others watched with quiet worry. A few sent messages to Earth, offering words of comfort and vague promises of peace. But Earth did not reply. The silence was louder than war in the central chamber of Station 9. A screen played a slow-motion loop of the attack on New Terra, taken from the black drone hidden beneath the soil, showing each explosion, each building that fell, each child that ran before the flames caught up. No words were added, no music, no message, because the footage spoke loud enough. Commander Hayes turned to his officers and gave a simple nod, and they understood the order because it had only one meaning: move. The first wave of ships exited dark space near the edge of Volari territory, cloaked in shadows and heat shields. Designed to fool sensors, they came with no warnings and no greetings. They did not carry banners or declare war. They carried only silence and death on board each vessel. Soldiers prepared in quiet calm, checking weapons, reviewing maps of Volari installations, and whispering names of friends who once lived on New Terra, because this was not about victory, it was about memory. The galaxy had forgotten what humans were capable of when they stopped asking for peace and started answering with power, and now it would remember. The Volari had grown proud in recent years, building fleets, expanding borders, speaking of unity, while hiding weapons in their trade ships and spies in their embassies. But they had not counted on the old human habit of watching and waiting in deep space beyond the eyes of governments. Human intelligence units had gathered years of data on Volari patterns, routes, passwords, habits, even the weak points in their flagship armor. Now That knowledge moved through the fleet like fire through dry grass, turning plans into action and silence into storm. The first strike came at Outpost 6, a fuel station orbiting a dead moon used by Volari. Warships for resupply vanished in a single flash, as a human missile pierced the core and turned the station into a ring of fire. Then came the raids on listening. Posts and comms relays, each one taken without alert, each one falling before they could scream, and all of them erased before the Volari command could connect the dots one by one. The lights on their star map blinked out, and no one knew why. The High Council of the Volari met in secret chambers, voices raised, faces tight with fear as they demanded answers. But their commanders had none because they had never seen humans act like this, not in years, not ever. They thought Earth had gone soft, that humans had chosen farming and trade over force, but they were wrong, and now the cost would be more than ships or soldiers. It would be legacy in a hidden chamber on one of the fleet's command ships. An old recording played the last message sent from New Terra before the signal cut off, the voice of a child saying a name over and over again, before the static swallowed it. Commander Hayes listened with his eyes closed and said nothing, then turned to his crew and gave the next coordinates. Did not speak, they simply moved in another part of the galaxy. A group of Volari diplomats tried to reach out to human allies, but found only closed channels, locked frequencies, and the growing sound of panic in their own voices. Other alien nations began to notice the shift, watching trade lines vanish and spaceports close, as if the stars themselves were folding in and around Earth, cutting off the noise and focusing all energy on something unseen but dangerous. Some leaders asked if this was the beginning of a new war. Others wondered if Earth was preparing to strike not just the Volari, but anyone who stood near them, and those thoughts created fear more powerful than any weapon back on Earth. The people still did not know the full truth, only that something had happened far away and the government had gone quiet. But in certain circles among old veterans and off-grid explorers, the phrase echo response began to spread like sparks in dry wind, and they knew what it meant. Humans were coming, and they were not coming to talk. The silent armada. The edge of Volari space was quiet and still, with black skies above and cold stars blinking like distant warnings, but beneath that silence something was moving, something old, something patient, something born not from power, but from memory. The first wave of human ships moved without signal, without sound, their engines hidden by cloaking systems and their trails wiped clean by dark matter layers. No sensors could catch, no eyes could follow them as they entered the outer edge of the enemy's zone. Because they were not there to be seen, they were there to end inside. The lead ship soldiers stood like statues, their suits dark, their weapons locked, and their eyes fixed on the red glow of the mission board, showing targets blinking slowly, each one marked not for capture, not for message, but for destruction. They were not angry, they were not loud. They were focused because the loss of New Terra was not just an attack, it was a message. And now this was the answer. Commander Hayes stood at the front of the control deck, watching the countdown tick lower as each ship aligned with its target. He spoke only once, and the message passed through every ship like an echo that needed no voice, no mercy, no survivors across the galaxy. The Volari continued their expansion, speaking to allies, planning new paths, holding meetings in grand halls filled with lights and voices. But none of those rooms knew that above them, in space, shadows had already arrived. The first attack came at Station Arx, a communications hub that linked 12 Volari sectors. The humans used a kinetic strike, a weapon with no fuel, no warhead, only raw force dropped from high orbit, like a metal hammer. And in one blink the station was gone, and every signal in that region went dark. No warning, no sound, no survivors. Then the factories were hit, places where ships were built and fueled and loaded with weapons, now reduced to fire and floating metal. with workers gone in moments before even knowing someone had come. Then the listening towers fell places where the Valari spied on other species. Trapped trade ships listened for secret deals, now filled with smoke and broken walls and silent halls. Not a single human voice was heard. Not a single name was given, only the shape of shadows on camera footage, and the slow-growing fear that the humans had returned not to talk, not to bargain, not to ask, but to erase. In the Valari capital, panic began to spread, whispers moving faster than officials' orders, as rumors turned to fear, and fear turned to confusion. Why did the humans not respond to messages? Why did they not ask for peace? Why were they not on the council floor shouting for justice? Why were they only attacking and then vanishing into black? The answer was simple. The humans had watched, they had listened, they had waited, and now they had no need for words. In the deep quiet of the command fleet, a small ship returned from a special mission, its memory banks filled with footage from Valari outposts, abandoned in chaos or filled with surrender signs. Written in dozens of languages, none of them answered. The footage was cold and clear, families hiding, soldiers crying, leaders trying to flee, and in each case the humans passed them by marking them not as targets, but as empty zones not worth the effort, because the targets were not the weak, the targets were the ones who gave the order, the ones who sent the fleet, the ones who called for New Terra to fall one by one. Those names were pulled from secret records, traced through financial links, through command networks, through hidden chats, and then those people simply disappeared. No noise, no fire, no drama, only silence, and then nothing. Across other star systems, leaders watched with growing fear as Valari outposts closed and their patrols vanished. They began to worry not about war, but about silence. Because silence meant humans were moving on. One peaceful world where Valari ships had once trained. Now there was only a crater, a wide black scar where the training base had been, and floating above it a single human drone playing a message on repeat. This is not war, this is correction. Some tried to respond, some begged for terms, some promised to help find those responsible for the attack on New Terra. But the humans did not reply, and the silence grew louder each day. In one deep sector, a Valari dreadnought, the pride of their fleet, waited with shields raised and weapons charged, ready for a fight that never came, because the humans disabled its power from a distance, locked the crew inside, and drifted it slowly into the sun, not out of cruelty, but out of efficiency. They did not need prisoners, they needed the galaxy to understand. In the outer shell of the human fleet, new names began to appear, names of planets that had once traded with Valari ships, that had once stood silent during human struggles, now marked not for destruction, but for isolation. Because neutrality was no longer accepted. You were with them, or you were nothing. Inside the training deck of one battlecruiser, a new recruit stood watching a feed of New Terra's last moments, and asked quietly, "What happens next?" An older soldier answered without turning, "Next is memory, then is fire, then is silence again. That is the way now." And so it was. The humans did not need parades. They did not need flags. They did not even need revenge, because they had learned something deeper, something older, something the rest of the galaxy forgot. If you push people long enough, if you break their homes and silence their voices and take their peace, they will not come back with sadness. They will come back with precision, and they will not come to talk. The fall of the Valari. The Valari Empire once stood as a symbol of power. Its ships moved without fear. Its voice echoed across every star council, and its name was written in fear and pride. But now that name began to fade like smoke in heavy wind, because the humans had come, and they were not stopping. Every Valari sector turned quiet. One by one, spaceports stood empty, trade routes stayed cold, defense systems stayed locked, with no one left to guide them, because the people who once gave orders were either gone or too afraid to speak. The great capital city, once filled with lights and towers, now stood in half Darkness as news of new attacks reached every corner, but no one knew where the humans were or where they would strike next. And that fear grew faster than any war ever had in hidden rooms, Valeri. Leaders held meetings in whispers. They blamed each other for the attack on New Terra. They spoke of peace, they begged for plans, but no one could explain why the humans ignored their messages or why their ships vanished before any scanner could catch them. Panic became action, and action became collapse. Military commanders refused to follow orders. Some fleets turned back from the border, others left their posts and fled to unknown regions, hoping to hide in forgotten stars. But there was nowhere left to hide, because the humans had maps older than any of them, and systems that reached deeper than most ever knew. On the ruined world of Maras, once known as a stronghold of the Valeri, the people woke to silence and dust. Human ships had passed through in the night, not to destroy but to dismantle. They took the weapons, they shut down the towers, and they left a message carved into stone by machine. Do not return, do not rebuild, do not forget. That message spread faster than fire across every channel, because it meant the humans were not simply winning, they were rewriting the rules of power. Without speaking, without asking, in the central human fleet, Commander Hayes stood over the hologram of the Valeri Empire, watching as red faded to black, as once guarded systems turned cold, and as surrender codes filled the air like falling ash. But he did not smile, and he did not stop. A young officer asked if they should respond to the latest peace offering. But Hayes shook his head once, and the question died, because this was never about talk and never about deals. This was about truth and memory, and what must be done back on Earth. The people finally heard of New Terra, and the silence that followed the loss. The grief moved through the population like a wave. But behind that grief came something older, something stronger, a unity made not of hope but of shared fire. They did not demand revenge, because revenge had already begun, and they knew the hands who carried it were steady and cold, and just in the burned remains of a Valeri archive hidden deep under one of their core cities, human ground teams found records of the attack plans against human colonies, maps showing more targets, names of planets, schedules of assault, and even messages from officials laughing at the ease of their first strike. Those messages were sent to Earth, shown across screens in training halls, played in silence, to soldiers who needed no orders, only understanding. On one of the human ships, a survivor of New Terra sat quietly by a window watching stars drift past. She did not speak. She had not spoken since her rescue, but she listened to the sound of engines and felt something heavy lift from her chest as she realized she was not alone and never had been. Her name was entered into the central war log as the last voice recorded from New Terra, and her silence became part of the fleet's mission, written into the code of each strike as a reminder of what was taken and what would never be taken again on the Valeri homeworld. Leaders made one final plan. They would send their own ships into deep space. They would leave the Empire behind and start new, somewhere far away where humans would not follow. But they were wrong again. Human drones found those ships before they left orbit, locked their engines, sent a signal to turn back, and when no answer came, the drones activated quiet charges that disabled each ship mid-flight, leaving them floating dead among stars, as a message that escape was not an option. The galaxy's small species, once under Valeri control, began to rise. They destroyed Valeri flags. They opened human transmissions, and some even asked for guidance, not for rule, not for power, but for peace and protection. And though the humans did not answer those requests, they left those planets alone, and that was answer enough. Back on the fleet, Commander Hayes stood before his crew and gave the final order, the one he had waited to speak since the signal first arrived from New Terra. He spoke it slowly, without emotion. And them and they did. The last of the Valeri war fleets met the humans near the broken edge of their space, a place filled with old wreckage and the remains of forgotten battles. They came with fear. They came with desperation. They opened channels and begged for mercy. No answer came, only light, only fire, only the clean, silent precision of human ships moving through them like knives through air. It was not a battle, it was not a war, it was a conclusion when the final Valari command ship broke into two halves and drifted into the void. A wave of silence spread across every system as the reality sank in. The Valari were no more. The name that once meant fear now meant nothing, and the people who once called themselves rulers were now shadows running from a storm that never spoke back on Earth. The news arrived without celebration, only quiet nods only. Still hands only. The weight of justice done. New Terra would be rebuilt, new systems would be watched, new lines would be drawn, but the message was clear and would never be forgotten. You can hurt us once, you will never hurt us again. What comes after fire? The war ended not with a treaty, and not with surrender, but with silence across the stars. The kind of silence that came only after storms had passed, and the sky no longer held fire. The last Valari ship had fallen, and their homeworld stood without leaders, without weapons, without voice. Their symbols were torn down by their own people, and their broadcasts stopped as if the Empire had never existed. Human ships did not stay, they left after the final strike, moving back through space without speaking. Without looking back, they had done what they came to do, and there was nothing more to take, and nothing more to say on the Central Earth Network. The news spread slowly, not with music or banners, but with a simple headline that read, "The colony of New Terra will rise again," and below that a list of names of the fallen and the names of the teams now working to rebuild. In orbit above the broken land, new platforms floated quietly, bringing supplies, air, water, shelter. One piece at a time, the green would return and the walls would rise, and the people would walk again where fire once lived. A small boy stood near the edge of a field, now filled with black soil. His hands held a seed, and his eyes searched the sky, and beside him an old woman smiled without words and placed her hand on his shoulder, because both of them knew that what was gone would grow again elsewhere in the galaxy. The council met under a new flag, not because someone demanded it, but because the old one meant nothing now. The seats once held by the Valari stood empty, and no one dared to fill Thema. Human representative arrived not with guards or ships, but alone, dressed in gray. No medals, no weapons, no smile. He walked to the center of the hall and placed a small device on the floor, and then waited. The others in the room shifted uneasily, some whispering, some watching, but none speaking. Then the device began to play, and on the walls around them, images appeared, not of ships or battles or victories, but of New Terra before the attack. Children laughing, machines humming the fields, growing people walking with hope in their steps and light in their eyes. Then came the silence. Then came the fire. Then came the message. The voice from the device was not loud and not angry. It was calm. It was steady, and it said, "We did not come for war. We did not seek power. We did not wish for control. We asked only for peace, for space to live, to grow, to remember, and to be left alone." The voice paused, then continued, "But when peace was taken from us, when lives were ended without reason, when fire came to our homes, we remembered who we are and what we must do." The device stopped, and the human stepped back and left the hall without another word. No one stopped him. No one followed him. He did not need to speak again. The message had already been written in the stars, back on Earth. A monument rose in the center of the capital, made of stone from New Terra, carved by hand without machines, each name of the fallen placed by a different person, each line a memory, each word a vow. It did not stand high and it did not shine. It stood low and strong, so that even a child could touch the names and understand what they meant. People came not to cry but to remember, and to promise. Above the monument, a ship flew low, a training vessel filled with young recruits, learning not how to destroy, but how to protect, how to build, how to watch the stars, and know that silence could mean danger, and danger could come without warning. On The training deck, a teacher spoke to the group, showing maps and lessons. But not stories of victory, and not glory, only the truth of what happened, and why it must never happen again. One student raised a hand and asked what comes after fire. The teacher paused, looked at the stars, then answered, hope comes. Growth comes, memory comes, and we must carry all of them, because fire burns and fire fades. But what we build after can last forever if we choose it. A quiet corner of space, a drone drifted without engine, without signal, its power nearly gone. Its mission complete, but its memory full inside. It were the records of the first attack, the voices of New Terra, the sound of the wind before the sky broke, and the heartbeat of a people who only wanted peace. The drone sent one final message to the stars. Not words, just a signal, a pulse, a rhythm that said we lived, we fought, we remember. That it went dark in the years that followed. The galaxy changed, not quickly and not loudly but deeply. Valari name vanished from maps, their systems marked as free zones protected by human patrols, not for control but for balance, to keep others from repeating the same mistake. New colonies rose across the stars, some human, some allied species, some mixed, and all of them watched each other, not with fear but with careful eyes, because the lesson had been learned and the price had been paid. Among them, New Terra stood again, its buildings stronger, its fields wider, its people older but not broken. They did not hide, and they did not arm themselves with hate. They built with care and with memory, and they taught their children not to forget, but also not to live in anger. On a hill near the edge of the colony, a new school opened, shaped like a star facing the sky, and inside the first lesson written on the wall said, we are human, we are many, we remember, we build, we protect, and we will not be broken. And across the stars that message lived, not in fear, not in pride, but in truth, because they had attacked a human colony, and the galaxy would never recover. The end.